Perfect.
I'm Diana Winters.
Hi,
I'm the
Diana.
Deputy Director of the Resident Center.
Oh,
So
that's right. Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. And I know Michael and you
Mhm.
have
So I'm saying, like, at least we have a
yeah,
slide.
gotcha.
already
So-
met formally.
Thank you.
So,
I mean, we know.
and I told everybody I'll only be here, I can only stay for about an hour, maybe 11:10 or so, but they know.
Yeah,
I
and
will
then
sneak
I
out.
guess from after I
Probably
talk
drop
about
a
my
bunch
paper,
of stuff
we
by
don't
accident.
Yeah.
Try not to.
You have permission
Then
now.
we'll just open it up.
And then the rest of our outline, we wanna make sure we talk about like the future of the initiative, we try to recruit people.
Well, it's a little tough.
Well, they might watch it.
Oh, they might
and
watch
feel
it, yeah.
inspired.
Where's the camera? We need to do like a big plug.
Yeah, is it those?
There's those
Oh,
two.
those are the cameras?
I don't know.
You don't know where to.
We're trying to plug the initiative for students,
And also just.
but none of you are current students who can join.
But I can be an emissary.
Okay, perfect. Well, I feel like someone from Food Law Society would be interested. So I think you can.
It's a tough time slot. I'm sure they're interested.
Yeah,
They probably just were like, I can't get up at 9 on a Saturday.
definitely.
Yeah, today was probably going to be less populated than yesterday.
It makes it less intimidating, so.
From having been at health law conferences through the years, I have done so many panels, like as a professor to nobody, that it's like, because concurrent panels are also hard when you've got 6 panels and you've got less people, whatever.
Yeah.
I've always found them very valuable for my own work.
It's not about you and your content. But here we are. There are 6 incredible people in this room. And I think we should start a discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Let's do
Let's
it.
get into it.
Okay, let's do it. All right, so thank you so much for coming to join our discussion this morning. We had discussed potentially introducing the audience as well as ourselves. So even though you just did a little bit, would you all like to just introduce yourself and say whatever you think is relevant to this morning?
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm happy to be part of this intimate discussion. My name is Allegra Molkenthin, and I am currently a PhD student at UC Berkeley in the history department. I just started this fall. My background is in history and public health, and so I've been working in public health for the past 5 years, more on the laboratory, health security, biosecurity side of public health. And now I'm turning it back to history, and my public health has really informed my historical questions. And right now I'm in a very exploratory mode, just trying to be a sponge and really learn a lot and think about some of the ways that critical race studies and other approaches to really thinking across a lot of different parts of our lives and society can be really helpful, especially applicable to something like health, public health. So that's me. Happy to be here.
I am Latoya Baldwin-Clark. I am a professor here at UCLA. I teach critical race theory. I also teach property. And I'm here, one, because I volunteered to be here to help out, but also because as a faculty director of CRS, I've talked to Michael multiple times thinking about the ways in which CRS can collaborate with other centers, and he has just spoken so highly of you all and, you know, of this program and what you all are doing. And so it's actually here so I can kind of see what do these synergies kind of look like and what might, you know, be good. And I don't think I know Halia. I don't know Halia, but I know Lucy and Andrea, so.
Hi, Diana Winters. I'm the Deputy Director of the Resnick Center. I know all of you through school, and Andrea and I have known each other for years now through food law and other connections. And I'm excited to hear the presentation. I've watched this project develop, and it's terrific. And I'm excited to see this presentation, and we've been working towards integrating it into the symposium for months, and so I'm excited.
Good morning, have a seat anywhere, we're having an intimate discussion.
We had Habitat Humanity come over to pick up some furniture,
Great.
and I couldn't get them to come early enough.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're fine.
But we finally got it cleared out. But I didn't realize that there's a little scuff on your furniture. They won't accept it. Just like they want pristine, perfect conditions.
Now we know, it's okay.
I don't own anything that's pristine, perfect condition, except for our cat.
So we're just doing some introductions since we're an intimate group. We've decided that we're gonna make this very conversational,
Great.
and so we're
Would you like
almost
to
ready.
briefly
Yeah.
introduce?
Have
Do you want to introduce?
You wanna
Have
do
we
a quick
started already?
We have started.
Yes.
So we're doing recording now,
I'm sorry
so.
to be so rude to just walk in and start talking
You're
about
okay.
my
It's
life.
If you like, just, say who you are and why
Sure.
you're here today, and that'd be great.
Thank you, Andrew, for introducing me. Michael Roberts, and I'm the founding executive director of the Resnick Center for Food, Law, and Policy. And I'm just thrilled to be here today. So our superstar students and everyone else, and I've been at UCLA now for going on 11 years, which is amazing. And this is a project that we've wanted to kick off for some time now, so I'm just grateful to have the talent around us to actually pull it off. And it's great to have Andrea back here, Professor Freeman back here in California where she belongs.
It's true.
So, I don't know, do you want me to say more than that?
That's
or
good
is
for
it just-
now.
Okay,
That's
great.
just the basic introductions,
All right.
and then we'll get deeper into it.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Weiss, and I graduated from UCLA Law last year and specialized in critical race studies and public interest law and policy. And just by way of a little background into my interest in food and food studies, growing up, food has always been really central to my family. My mom is a chef, and my family owns some farms in the Central Valley. So when I went to college and started taking classes in agroecology and other things, it really made me question a lot of the farming and not just the monoculture practices, but also like labor and how that relates to other things. And so that all made me really interested in food studies. And before I came to law school, I did Food Corps, which is an AmeriCorps program. So I taught students about gardening in Altadena, and that was really great. And then I was able to take classes here in the food law program, and Hallie and I, we'll talk more about it, but we did a project together with our public interest law program seminar that we worked with the meatpacking union in Vernon, and so again got to think about food and labor and those connections, and so all of that inspired me to be part of this initiative. So thanks everyone for coming, and excited to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Halia. I am also a recent graduate of UCLA Law, class of 2025. I studied international and comparative law, public interest law, and critical race studies as my specializations. Before that, I attended UC Berkeley, where I studied society and environment with a concentration in justice and sustainability. A lot of my studies focused on agriculture and animal agriculture, as well as alternative protein development. While there, I also worked in food waste for dining halls. After that, I started a mutual aid organization at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in the Inland Empire in San Gabriel Valley, and was an LA Food Policy Council cohort member in 2021. As Lucy mentioned, in law school we got to work with meatpacking workers in Vernon who were experiencing labor abuse, and I also got to start this initiative with Professor Roberts, Professor Winters, Lucy, and Lavanya. So very excited and honored to be here.
Wonderful. I'm Andrea Freeman. I teach over at Southwestern Law School. I brought a copy of my book to show you. Well, this is my second book, and it's a critical race theory analysis of food law and policy, and traces the use of food as a tool of subordination and oppression throughout US history, from colonization through enslavement and immigration and assimilation up into modern food movements and policies and programs. So I'm really excited to be working with students in the Resnick Center to try to get a closer integration with CRS program, and I think this is the moment to do it. I think a lot of people are seeing now, especially with the events that have been taking place in Gaza being very well publicized, I guess, in some ways, but just how important food is in global and national politics. So if you like, you could start talking a bit about the initiative and what your projects and focuses are.
Yeah. Maybe we can just introduce some concepts before talking about the initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. So food security is defined as food availability, accessibility, and utilization. And something really interesting that is a really frustrating problem that I think us in the law like to solve problems is we certainly produce more than enough food as globally, and then just so many people are not food secure. And so if you look at just in terms of the US in 2023, 13.5% of people, or 18 million households, were food insecure, which is just a mind-boggling number when you think about just how much food there actually is. And thinking about working toward a place where everyone is food secure. Yeah, and thinking about this through the lens of a food systems approach, which is defined there. And should I read it? But
If you want.
sure, okay. Everything involved in the production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food products that originate from agriculture, forestry, or fisheries, and parts of the broader economic, societal, and natural environments in which they are embedded. So thinking about food as a system and not just as I think a lot of us tend to do, just see food in the grocery store or whatever, and we're very disconnected from who's producing it and where it's coming from and the global aspect of food production.
So we started this initiative for a variety of reasons. Maybe I'll skip ahead to some of those reasons. One of those reasons, and you can kind of see it on this slide, but it also had a technical difficulty. This is supposed to represent racial retrenchment, which is something that our society is really experiencing right now. So retrenchment is this idea that after a progressive reform, there is this backlash, and for every step forward, there's like 2 steps back. And it can be really frustrating to kind of see that happen in society. Right now, we're experiencing so many harms like constant ICE raids and attacks on CRT, attacks on education, history, like the EPA, the Department of Agriculture, voting rights, kind of everything. And I feel like that's also like why it's so critical to mobilize in this moment and really try to make CRT a part of other fields. And I felt this especially as a law student. Like, it's so frustrating sometimes being in a torts classroom or in a civil procedure classroom or contracts, and the racial context is just completely ignored, and the social context isn't talked about, and we're just taught that law is law and that's how it should be, and we don't talk about why or how it got that way or how it should change and what should it be. So when we started this initiative, we really wanted to talk more about the ways that race, inequity, gender, disability, class all intersect with food systems and are such a big part of it. So as you can see here, these are just some headlines about attacks on CRT from the past few years. And another reason why we kind of wanted to start this project was, I was like, one of the reasons I chose UCLA was because of the food law program and the critical race studies program. And, when I got here, I kind of wanted to see more discussions about food and race. And that wasn't something I was really experiencing even in my CRT class, or didn't really see offered in the curriculum as much as I wanted. But a really big motivating factor for me for being passionate about food law and about this issue is growing up and like reading about really cool activists and people like Erica Huggins, Shirley Chisholm, Fannie Lou Hamer, Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, who did so much for food systems, who started programs like the Free Breakfast Program with the Black Panthers, and who started SNAP and WIC benefits, and who started really mobilizing this idea of food sovereignty and food for the people, and protecting farm workers. So these are some of the ideas that brought us here. And so when we started the initiative, we kind of put our heads together and we thought about what we wanted to accomplish. And we came to 3 goals. First, we wanted to gather and curate a lot of resources for educators, practitioners, activists to be able to use and share with others. Second, we wanted to develop curricular toolkits that could be used in the classroom. And we also wanted to provide a publication space for scholars and students who were passionate about the area. And so we've started this obviously in alignment with CRT. The second part here, Third-World Approaches to International Law, is a little more specific to my paper, but it has similar roots with the global South and post-colonial movements and just roots of resistance. And it really tries to center the subaltern in dialogue. Professor Roberts, would you like to add anything?
You guys have done a great job. Just a few things. I think I've been involved now in food law for 20 years, and over time it became very apparent to me that so many of the issues that are in food do intersect with race, equality, inclusion. It's hard to find an issue that doesn't, quite frankly. It's not, I said it the wrong way. It's not that so many do, it's just everything seems to. When you get down to some of, especially on the structural side. So when we talk about the food system, we're really talking about relationships, aren't we? Relationships between consumers and government, consumers and stores, consumers and farmers and stores, et cetera, et cetera. And Andrew, you touch on this in your writings, and these relationships oftentimes present structural barriers to achieving equality and so on and so forth. And I don't mean to be abstract about it. We can talk about the particulars, giving loans to black farmers. I mean, the largest class action lawsuit in this country's history had to do with the Pigford case, and then later with Native Americans, and so who have had the same issues. We talk about grocery stores and food deserts or food apartheid, whatever terminology you want to use, and how restrictive covenants really impact peoples of color, especially in low-income areas. We can talk about food advertising targeted towards children of color in very, very direct ways. I mean, Duke, every single year, Duke and CSPI gives a report on this. And the list goes on and on and on. So it's every part of the food system has a link, a structural link to race, equality, and inclusion. And so I guess the question is, to me, it's not that piece is settled. The real question is, what do we do about it? And so marrying critical race studies in food law, I think is a real positive step forward. So I've always had the question, how do we do that within the law school? How do we integrate? And you guys have started this. Andrew, you've been at this for some time now. But what do we do on a practical level here at UCLA? And how do we mobilize? I mean, this room should be filled with people who are interested.
They're watching it on video.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. Beg my pardon for everybody on video. But we're thrilled to have so much interest. And really, that's, I think, the question is, how can we advance scholarship? There are so many articles that students could write and faculty could write on these issues, in quantitative analysis as well as qualitative analysis. So I'm very energized about this. I'm just a little impatient, thinking that we really ought to be moving more quickly than we are, but it takes time. And so I think that we just attended a conference on food law at Harvard Law School, and there were 120 students, 70 different law schools, I believe, right? And the tremendous amount of interest. In every table I went to, we had this faculty roundtable. I talked about this initiative, and I was really thrilled to hear the interest at every single table I went to, even from schools that were from the more red states, the rural areas. In fact, it seemed to be even more of interest to them. So I think that we've got a huge opportunity here. And so I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about how do we then mobilize and move this forward? Because you two have left law school. We have to recruit more folks that are here and get not only students but faculty involved as well.
So I think that's a good segue to kind of talking a little bit more practically about how the initiative is being used and how we've kind of contributed some scholarship.
Yeah. So we'll just use some of the papers that we've written as examples of this initiative. So this past spring, I took Professor Roberts' food law and policy class and wrote a paper, and so I'll just talk a little bit about that now. And so my paper focused a lot on the agricultural industry's reliance on immigrant labor and how that can exploit people because of the fear of deportation. There's really stark statistics, I think I have some in here, about H-2A visas, which are for unskilled laborers. There was a study in 2020 that found that 100 out of 100 of the visa workers that were interviewed had experienced at least one serious legal violation working in the US. And that's just the people that have visas. So there's also a ton of labor violations constantly happening outside of that. I was in the UCLA Immigrant Family Legal Clinic last year, and so we did a few of DALE clinics, and DALE is Deferred Action for Labor Enforcement, which was a program that unfortunately USCIS has shut down since, but it helped people who were at workplaces where there were serious violations get deferred action. And so at these clinics, I met a lot of farm workers who they had to for their visa or application, but it was really, really powerful as a scribe and as someone to listen to it, to hear about these violations. Especially there was this woman, Rosa Sanchez, who she worked at a carrot farm and she was killed in the field. A truck ran her over and the farm made everyone continue working with her body in the field. And so all of the people that were there that day were able to apply for a deferred action. And so I was helping them do these applications. And so this sort of inspired this paper, which in critical race theory, there's a really important tenet, which is storytelling and the power of people's stories to enact change. And So this was, I think, a good example of that in terms of labor violations and then how we can turn that into stories that can actually have change. My paper also talked about it's such a moving target right now, immigration law. So even since writing this paper in the spring, so many things have gotten so much worse. But thinking about the rhetoric and the dehumanization of immigrants and migrants, and thinking about how that has just direct correlation to who we're voting for and then the policies that those people are enacting was also a big part of my paper.
May I say something? Because I think, Lucy, you just touched on something really important. And I think that shows the power of integrating critical race studies with food law, is that sometimes something's in front of us and we don't see it, or we don't see the broader perspective. So when you wrote your paper about storytelling, I actually learned a lot. When Hillia wrote her paper using 12 analysis, I learned a lot. And I'm to the point now in my life where I don't really learn very much by reading student papers anymore. Because I've heard just about every issue there is. But that's the thrill of actually this integration, is we can educate each other. And I suspect there's a lot of folks who have been in critical race studies all their lives, but don't know a lot of the food issues. So I think by integrating, the clarity that comes on some of these issues is really quite remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and then I think just as a part of my paper also, I talked about this food security and food insecurity, and it's just one of those other like really deeply frustrating and awful things, which is just the level of farm worker food insecurity. And so here we see there's some statistics about that in a study by UC Merced. But yeah, I just think thinking about these issues through a critical race studies lens and also food systems approach, I think is really important. And I think that as we'll talk about later, I think it will be great for more students to do this and more faculty to continue this kind of work. You want to do your?
And it's so important what you say in the paper about these are the people working with the food, producing the food that actually don't have access to it, right? And it's just a reminder of how even when you're in proximity, it doesn't mean you have access, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And something else that I touch on that I think is another mind-boggling part of this, which is food doesn't have, I mean, the markets are so interconnected and food is such a global commodity, and yet we have these, country borders, and we aren't thinking of people as being borderless, but we are thinking of food and of selling food as being borderless. And so just those systems are so connected, but we treat them so differently, and we treat, food is a huge part of the US GDP and a huge, and a huge market.
Yeah, people are criminalized, but food is not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, do you want to talk about your paper?
Maybe we could briefly touch on Lavania's paper. So
Oh, yeah.
Lavania co-started this initiative with us, and she's not here today, couldn't make it. But her paper focuses on food apartheid, and I haven't read it thoroughly, but perhaps someone who is more familiar with it can briefly summarize some of the.
Well, it's been a while since I've read her paper, but it's an excellent paper, and it gets to the importance of using terminology. And apartheid has a much more impactful resonance with us when we think about the language that's used instead of just a food desert. And I think her argument's very compelling. And it's also makes us feel very uncomfortable which I think is a sign of a good paper. Because we go into these communities and you can actually see this sort of apartheid and its effects. It's also an important paper because it does, as described on the slide, it does shed light on the systemic discrimination. And getting back to that earlier point that I made about restricted covenants with supermarkets, again, a lawful use of contracts, but a very, very insidious result where folks who live in low-income communities then have to bus or somehow get to a grocery store or have to buy really bad food at a convenience store. So, her paper really focuses on language, structural and systemic discrimination, and then the use of power and how law can be used as a force in dealing with these issues. So it's kind of a perspective adjustment as well as some real practical advice on how to use law in an appropriate way to solve some of these problems of food access. Because you're right, Lucy, we produce enough food. We just have to figure out ways to distribute in ways that are just and equal and fair.
Yeah, and to kind of emphasize that, what the term apartheid really does is it emphasizes the structural design of all of the disparities and inequities in food systems, and that's
The intentionality.
the intentionality.
Right, because a lot of times people will just say this is a natural result of poverty and inequality, which of course is also intentional, right? But they don't see how systems are specifically designed to keep some people poor and restrict access and others increase.
And I think the intentionality can also encompass our not wanting to see it. In other words, it may be some of us may not be intentional about it, but our refusal to see something for what it is certainly, ties into the problem.
Absolutely.
I'm going to mention something before yours. There's another paper that is going to be soon published by one of my students from my race and law class last year. And there's a Southwestern Law Review issue that is based on this book, but it's other people's commentary on what inspired them. So this is a student paper about street vendors in LA. Yeah, so it's really great, and it traces the history of street food vending in LA, and then of course the way that racist stereotypes are used to justify over-regulation and over-policing of street food carts, and suggest ways that we could have new laws and regulations that would make it easier. I mean, this is a problem I think that's really risen to the surface. Now we see people abandoning their carts, right? Walking around having to sell things all in hand because they have to run, or having lookouts on corner, right? Even that space of street vending has completely transformed, and it's very definitional of LA, right? So she's Mexican American, grew up in LA, and she talks a lot about the different street food and how significant it is to everyone's culture and feelings about LA, and how this is destroyed through these racist structures and policing and stuff. Highly recommend. I'll share it with you all if you want to see it when it comes out. Yeah. Her name's Amanda Castro.
Yeah.
Amanda Castro.
So one of the most empowering things I've found as a law student and as a student studying CRT and TWAIL is the vocabulary that they give us and the tools that they equip us with for not only recognizing, defining, talking about issues, but problem solving and using unique approaches to problem solve. We mentioned storytelling, looking to the bottom. That's one strategy, but there's so many different ways that we can use these as tools and just so when we were talking about the initiative and how we wanted to envision it, for me it was really important to bring in these dialogues of people who have been traditionally oppressed, both in the United States and across the world, because food is a global system, right? So it was really important to me to make sure that we're using scholarship and theories and perspectives that don't just belong to the traditionally valued classes. So over here I have some text about TWAIL. TWAIL focuses on the perspective of the subaltern, which are groups systematically marginalized by colonial and neo-colonial power structures who often lack the means to articulate their legal claims or political interests within dominant institutions. TWAIL scholars recognize that international legal discourse has long excluded these voices, and they seek to amplify subaltern concerns by leveraging legal positionality and strategic engagement with global institutions. Within food law, this means critically examining how legal regimes contribute to hunger, land dispossession, and unequal access to agricultural resources. And so some of the ideas I wanted to explore were what rights and priorities are systematically excluded from international law, and can law be reimagined as something other than a tool of oppression? How can we use law and TWAIL and CRT to build the food system that we want to see a world where everyone has enough food, everyone has sovereignty and decision-making power in what food they have access to, where their labor is valued and not abused, and where we can imagine emancipatory futures. Does anyone know what this scene is from?
Hadestown?
It is, yeah. They have Hadestown is a musical. It's kind of structured in a way that resembles a plantation scene at times. And I thought it was a good example of what racial capitalism can look like. This is obviously a country that's been founded on slavery, on dispossession of indigenous lands, on the erasure of food forests, and has relied on traditionally like POC labor, whether that's current Latina labor and Filipino labor, or if it's Black labor or any migrant population. And this isn't something that's unique to the US. It's kind of a constant throughout the world. Every country you go to has different migrant groups that they rely on for their farm labor because it's such backbreaking work. So in the Middle East, for instance, in Iran, they rely a lot on Iraqi Afghan labor. In Israel, most of the farm workers are Thai. And in Europe, there's a lot of African labor. And so the pattern goes on. Another reason why I think this initiative and talking about these issues is so important is because there are more human slaves today than at any other point in human history. And when I say slave, I mean forced labor, and that can look like a variety of things. It can be child labor, or it could be indentured labor, it could be bonded servitude, it could be people forced into marriage to produce and to work in an environment they don't have choices in. But this map shows the density of modern slavery per country. If you want to learn more, you can go to the website Walk Free. It has the Global Slavery Index.
What are the colors corresponding to?
Density of
So like which are the highest and which are the lowest?
oh,
I
so the
think
darker
the
the
high,
color
yeah.
means a higher.
Yes.
Yeah. And food systems are obviously not
Okay.
separate from this. They rely largely on low wage or indentured slave labor. And just to kind of expand on that a little bit, one of my projects with the Promise Institute here was on supply chain resourcing on cacao production, which is used in chocolate, cocoa butter, etc. And there's a really high population or really high ratio of child labor and forced labor in the production of cacao and cocoa. And it's like a lot of foods, it's really difficult to separate out what is from unethical labor versus what is like ethically produced, because within the supply chain everything kind of gets mixed. So you'll have a big company buying from a bunch of small farmers, and so you can't just say like, well, Nestle is terrible and this company is good, because oftentimes everything kind of gets mixed up in the production line.
In fact, Talia, it's interesting because you made a really good point. The supply chain kind of alters the map for me.
This is very true.
Because you've got colors, but the colors are dependent upon demand in the countries that don't have the dark colors.
Yeah.
So it's all really integrated into one whole, in my mind at least. And that's where these could try to get back into food systems analysis, where we got contracts that develop relationships, which in turn create social conditions that lead to forced labor. But it's all one big whole, isn't it?
Yeah, so like a really good example of what you're saying, Professor Roberts, a lot of the demand for shrimp comes from Spain and China. They have really big port towns where they import a lot of shrimp. But the shrimp is usually taken from, they're like Spanish-owned vessels, but the captain's usually Chinese, and then all the laborers are usually like Malaysian, Indonesian, Thai, they're refugees, they're migrants, they're Filipino, and they get trapped on board these vessels for years at a time. Their passports are taken, they're not allowed to leave, they experience a lot of physical abuse. Within the ship itself, there's usually a racial hierarchy where, for instance, like Filipino workers might be at the bottom and might receive more beatings and not receive access to fresh foods. But it's driven by the demand in other countries, usually in minority world countries like the US, Canada, Europe, and Spain's a really big consumer, but and the wealth of the shrimp industry will go to the Spanish vessel owner, and it won't be distributed among the crew who are people of color and who, yeah.
Two things I want to say. One is that it's interesting is that takes place also like right in Hawaii. So it's not even something like far away, you know, not that I think that Hawaii is part of the United States, but still, you know, sort of technically and legally. So that's interesting. And just about the chocolate, because I think, you know, a lot of us consume chocolate, maybe some of us a lot more than others. But and also I recently did an event at a chocolate dispensary in Echo Park. So what was interesting there when we were discussing these issues of, you know, race, chocolate, etc., is that the owner was saying that even the certification, right? Because when we think about these and we think, oh, I want to do the right thing and I don't want to support the, you know, this. So like, oh, it's fair trade, it's this. But she's saying, I think similar to what you're saying, it doesn't really, it's not very meaningful. It's more like somebody paid for a label and that's how they got it on their food. So I don't know if that's something that you.
Yeah, and that's also really common in the fishing industry. Things will be certified as sustainably caught or responsibly, etc.
There's a wonderful documentary film about chocolate and certification called Chocolatoni, which you can see bars sold in stores. In fact, Professor Kate McIntosh, who heads up the Promise Institute for UCLA, her spouse was a lawyer in the case that on the film.
Wow.
And actually helped prosecute in a friendly way the owners of the chocolate company who voluntarily put themselves into the court's jurisdiction because they came into this finding out that the certification was so corrupt that they volunteered themselves to be prosecuted. And he was brought into the case to do that.
This is the Tony
Yeah.
Bars?
Yeah, and there's a wonderful documentary movie about this that's really quite illuminating. They actually go to these places of production and interview folks that supposedly don't have problems on the farms, and they did. And so but that problem's been around for a long time, and it's actually getting worse. And this U.S. Supreme Court didn't help too much in their recent
What?
case. Yeah.
Imagine that.
Okay.
This also reminds me of organic certification,
Yeah.
which is another thing that I think I used to be a naive shopper and think, oh, if it's organic, then it's good. But then when you go to small farms where the farmers are doing it right in terms of labor and in terms of land stewardship and all of that, it's just too expensive to get their organic certification a lot of the time. So it doesn't really mean a lot. And then there's, of course, like on top of that, access issues of like where you're shopping and if it even has these like fair trade or organic things in the first place that you can even be confused by.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or go to a farmer's market where
Right.
most vendors are doing
Yeah.
it, without, like in the least harmful way, but they don't have the money for the certification.
Exactly.
And then there's inaccessibility issues. Did we have a hand raised?
Yeah, but I wasn't sure if we were like.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you
Welcome.
for joining us.
Yeah.
I didn't want
Thank
to
you
put
so
you on the spot and make you introduce yourself,
Oh,
but
I
we'd
can't.
love
Yeah,
to.
but if you want to.
No, I
Because
totally
we're
can. I'm
having
so sorry. I'm so late.
No, you're so fine. Thanks for coming.
My name's Tola Lawal. I'm a staff attorney at the Center on Race and Equality in the Law at NYU Law. And the work I do is actually like nothing to do with food specific. Oh well, I mean, I'm sure everything has to do with food. I work with people who are currently incarcerated and basically help them come home through parole representation. And then when they do come home, do some reentry work. And then I do also some like organizing and advocacy. But I love thinking about food, talking about food. I go to the farm a lot actually in New York, like upstate, and like pick vegetables when I can, and then go to farmers markets, X, Y, and Z. And there's this one documentary. I don't know if you guys have watched it. It's called it's a docu-series called Rotten on Netflix. Okay, you've watched. Okay, it is like, have you watched it? It is so, I don't know if for whoever hasn't watched it yet, but it is like such a really in-depth sort of anthology series, if you will, of different markets that we all sort of food particular resources and markets that we all engage in unconsciously. And don't understand that avocados actually is like are funding like a whole war that's happening in Mexico, or like that cod, like you were talking about, like cod and other sort of fish that are captured are actually like really inhumanely captured and also like destroying whole ecosystems and things like that. But I just wanted to mention, as you were mentioning a documentary a little bit earlier, I just wanted to mention Rotten as well, like just throw it into the pot of like things that folks should consider watching, because it's really, really good. And I learned about the chicken industry and learned about like, yeah, don't get Tyson's, guys. Don't get
I'm like, are you vegan yet? Because
I'm actually not vegan, but like I eat halal, but you know, that's my little contribution I want to offer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And feel free to keep interjecting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another thing I want to point out, on top of the racial disparities, there's also kind of layers to it. So for instance, with fishing, and with shrimp specifically, there's a lot of Uyghur forced labor. So basically when China started getting a lot of attention from Western media about the Uyghur concentration camps, they kind of made people an offer of either go back to the concentration camp or go do labor somewhere else. So that's a really big portion of people who are forced onto the vessels. North Korea also sends a lot of people out to do different types of food production. And what's especially kind of horrific there is 90% of their paycheck goes back to the North Korean government to fund it. So they only end up getting a couple dollars, if anything, per month. And, you know, in a lot of these systems, people aren't really allowed to leave either. So, which is kind of. So here there's just some statistics. Approximately 3.5 million adults are in forced labor, under 12 million children, and that's specifically for food production. Of the roughly 30 to 50 million people in forced labor, the vast majority are POC. And yeah, it just kind of goes back to racial capitalism. Like, the people making money kind of benefit a lot from taking advantage of the structural racism that is espoused in the media of enforcing these laws and like ICE raids, and they benefit from keeping labor situations risky and dangerous and cheap. And yeah, so that's kind of one of the angles I explore in my paper. I also do a more traditional TWAIL analysis of neocolonialism and neo-imperialism in the context of all of this. And then I have some other examples of environmental racism that comes with food production. So for instance, this is regarding concentrated animal feeding operations. And for some context, an animal feeding operation is a farm where I believe they have at least 1,000 animal units, and then a concentrated animal feeding operation is where they have like 10,000. And each animal unit is also like, I forget the exact numbers, but like hundreds of pounds. So they're very large facilities. They produce these waste lagoons where in the left picture you can't really see any of the waste. It's being stored in smaller ponds, but it consists of blood, animal parts, feces, etc. But then when there's a storm, when there's flooding, what happens is oftentimes these overflow. They affect the communities around them. The communities are often low-income POC communities. Here I have a map of just North Carolina, and in the, let's see, I think the bottom center photo, you could see the concentration of CAFOs, animal feeding operations for hog farms. And then in the top left, you see the concentration of people of color. And in the top right, you see poverty. So you can see the overlap between communities who are affected by CAFOs versus communities who are not. And it's not just wastewater and feces that affects them, it's also like intentional waste sprays across their houses and properties. It's particulate matter, it's hay, it's feathers, it's things that give them respiratory diseases and asthma and chronic health problems. There's also diseases that will go around like MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus.
Nice.
Yes.
Very nice.
Thank you. And yeah, just the scale and the antibiotics that are sometimes used will also make diseases more resistant. So we get like bird flu, swine flu. We might have more superbugs like COVID, but.
And the air, so it's the literal air and you can't breathe and you
Can't
can't get
escape it.
away. Yeah.
So I teach this in my property class, particularly about North Carolina, with the hog farms and the spraying of the hog waste. And what I think is really interesting about North Carolina is that, I'm sure y'all know, they have these laws, these right to farm laws, which they act as though, oh, this is about protecting these family farms, but then they make it very, very difficult, the law itself, for the people who are in the direct spraying of this hog waste, make it very difficult for them to be able to bring claims of nuisance, really, because of the spraying of the hog waste on their homes. But North Carolina is, I think, like at the forefront of this hog waste issue where people, they've made it very difficult to sue.
And that's based on the structural ownership problems.
Yes, because they say, oh, this is small family farming or family farms. Yeah, it's owned by a family, but it's, it's not like the
Not a small
farm
farm.
that you're thinking about, right?
And then it's all going into exactly.
And that's actually a nice segue too into a complementary issue. We focus on labor, but also the ownership is a really big problem today. When you look at these issues, trying to own farmland is becoming more and more difficult for marginalized communities. And you can look at the macro level. We have land grabbing going on in places like African nations, and then you have just loan issues, and then you have structural issues, even subsidies. I mean, even what's going on with soybeans. You're going to have greater effects in marginalized farms. I guarantee you it's the large farms who are going to get the subsidies if it happens with the bailout that's necessary because of the tariffs. So all of these are part of the systemic problem, but it's also it's on the employee side, but it's also on the ownership side.
I just would say, I mean, it's not actually getting more or worse if you think about history, right? Because colonization stole all of the land and made it almost impossible for indigenous nations to own their own land. And then, we had after enslavement, we have sharecropping, where again, and people working the land can't own the land, right? So I think maybe we see waves, and we are talking about retrenchment now.
Well, I think that's what's fun about food policy is that it's as old as history. Because it's always been about power and it's always been about food. And so you're right, there's a historical resonance to it. But at the same time, we live in the present and these issues are in front of us, and there's trend lines that are pretty dire, I think, right now in terms of ownership.
Yeah, and so this map is of North Carolina, but this is also just happening around the world. In my paper, I discussed, for instance, places in rainforests in Mexico and Venezuela where indigenous peoples are murdered and massacred and dispossessed of their land, or sometimes for cattle grazing, and then sometimes it's to mine the land, and then that pollutes the ecosystem, the rivers, the farmland, and they can't farm, and they're forced to migrate, and when they migrate, they're criminalized, and people take advantage of them in cheap labor, and it's all this big cycle. So I talked a little bit about fishing. I've been on a big fishing dive, I guess. It's just fascinating. There's so little regulation of the oceans, and it's so easy to take advantage of the existing laws to manipulate and pretend your ship is from a different country and just change out flags.
And like international waters.
Yeah, and there's just
no
like
rules.
there's no rules there, etc. But I have some statistics on here. So these are just focused on trawlers that are illegal, that are too big. So this isn't even talking about like the 50,000 fishing vessels that are legal and that are just like destroying ecosystems. But like looking at the especially bad ones, you see a lot of forced labor, North Korean labor, Uyghur labor, as I mentioned, a lot of human rights abuse, a lot of murders happening on the high seas, and there's just no accountability. They'll just, like, who's gonna catch you? I will say Greenpeace has a really cool program called Sea Shepherd where they do try to catch these guys, but it also brings up some questions about, I guess, policing and colonialism and like who's getting away with what. But yeah, so that's one thing I talk about. And then I guess kind of some more basic facts, like 1 in 4 pieces of seafood that ends up on your plate in the US is caught on a fishing vessel with slave labor, if you didn't know. So yeah, the chickens are under terrible conditions, but it's all kind of terrible. And
even like also the fish is usually not too healthy, because I had a friend who was a NOAA inspector, and so she used to go out on the boats. Which they were very hostile to her. Also, being female was not very easy. But she would describe how they had their like buckets for their toilet needs, and they would just overflow into like all the fish buckets, and like everything was intermixed, and like it was extremely unsanitary. And so it's like all of these issues. Right, because not only do you have that going into it, but
The amount of
and
fraud,
with the
too.
waste, you'll oftentimes have people, like the workers, will have to wait around in it, and when they get open cuts and wounds, it's all
Exactly.
just-
nothing is.
New York Attorney General's office had a report that that's the greatest amount of fraud in food occurs in
Fish fraud.
fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's but it's like I would ask the students, if you go to a sushi bar and you know that you're susceptible to buying something that's not what it purports to be, what are you going to do? You're still going to go or not go? Most of the time we still go, don't we? So it is interesting. That's another question I wanted to ask you. It seems like most of food law and food regulation, when we deal with all of these issues, especially focusing on race issues, equality, and inclusion, we know where certain problems are, but we put so much emphasis on consumers solving these problems, don't we?
and it's so unsustainable and
Yeah.
difficult.
We do it through certification, labeling. We want people to make choices. We try to convey information, but what do you started commenting on it, but follow through a little bit more about how that works and why.
Yeah, I mean, I think the individual burden is kind of ridiculous. I was vegan for 5 years personally, and I definitely really appreciated it, but it became physically impossible for my body. I was taking vitamins, I still had a bunch of vitamin deficiencies, I developed chronic pain, I couldn't really leave my apartment. I wasn't bouncing back from injuries, and I developed all these allergies and food sensitivities. But yeah, I think the answer should lie within regulation and corporate regulation and not be forced onto individual consumers.
Yeah, I mean, that is an intentional shift of perspective to say, y'all solve the problem, right? So we don't have to, because those are the kinds of campaigns that corporations favor, right? He's like, okay, yeah, sure. If we have to do something, we'll post our nutrition facts, which nobody can read and understand anyway, right? As long as we don't actually have to do anything that costs us money, right? Like take ingredients out of the food that are gonna destroy your stomach lining, but it keeps it on the shelf for another month or two, right? So it's very deliberate, right? To say, let's have the consumers take care of this and we're absolved. And then we have this whole psychological framework around personal freedom and choice and agency, which is a very false kind of casting of things, right? Because people, one, don't actually have choice and agency about what they eat in most cases because they're so circumscribed. But also, again, we're perfectly fine with seatbelts and well, not everybody, but, we understand that there are regulations that help us and keep us safe, and generally people are okay with that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just the classic neoliberal line that we've been fed over and over again. And I think it is a really tough challenge, especially I took a great FDA class a couple semesters ago with Professor Winters, and my answer would have been, of course, just regulation, but turns out the FDA seems like such a mess. So I think it has to be coming from the government, but I think it also, I think it's unfair to put it on consumers. And I think it has to be both and, because I don't think that industry is going to be pushed unless consumers are pushing them. But it's also so difficult. I've been to law school and I go to the grocery store and it's so confusing to try to read the labels and know what's good for you and what's not. And and I have mostly time to grocery shop and so many things that so many people don't have. So I think it has to be a both and approach in terms of putting pressure on companies and, through our wallets, and also more government regulation, certainly.
Can I say one thing and then I have to go and I'm really sorry. This is great. And it's interesting, Andrew, you were talking about people are okay with seatbelts, and this is one of the exceptionalism of food though, because people aren't okay with food, in certain circumstances they are, but when you try to regulate food, just think about portion control in New York City or things like that, people flip. Because it's so personal and it's so individual, even though it's so global and interconnected, there is a antipathy often, towards regulation of food, which is just, it's so difficult and interesting and complex. And I think you're right, it has to be both and, all the things, all the forces have to come together, but it's so hard.
It feeds into very core values, right? Don't tell me what to do, nanny state, don't control me, it's my body, my choice,
But also it's a misunderstanding of you're not actually making the choices because they're being fed to you by the structure. and you've just internalized, or they've become normalized. And so it's a really interesting.
In fact, one of the first times nanny state was used, I think, I did some research on this, I'm not positive, but it was in the 1970s when the Washington Post wrote an editorial opposing the FTC's regulation of advertising of food on television under Jimmy Carter. And the FTC wanted to invoke some strict regulations. The Washington Post, the bastion of liberal news, progressive, came out and accused the FTC of creating a nanny state.
If you'd like to read a history of this, there is a new chapter that I just wrote that is in the it's a research handbook on law and political economy. I have a chapter called The Political Economy of Food, and it traces the origins of the term nanny state,
Oh, neat.
which started in the UK, and then
In the
that's
UK.
part of it. Yeah.
Was there a racial
Thank
component?
you all so much.
Thank you.
It's definitely in, but yeah.
But that is, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I don't wanna cut you off.
No, I didn't hear you first.
Oh, no, okay, I was just gonna say that, to your point about like it being a both and, I think part of the issue too is just the globalization of the food trade and also the lack of like the need for us to have anything that we want at any time now, right? Like I didn't know until I started going to the farm. Which is only recent. Like I only started going to the farm like 3 years ago. I had no idea that the seasons for apples was a specific set of seasons. The season for pears, the season for strawberries, and they're actually like short seasons. And so the apples actually have a lot of permanence, which is great. But like in general, it's really short. And then after that, like they're not growing anymore, and you have to wait until the next year to get it. And I think about the fact that I'm like I've never once thought, oh, I want a cherry, I'm gonna have to wait for a year. I just go to the store and go and buy it. And it just makes me think a lot about how, like, to your point about us also having to, I guess, bear some of the responsibility of like we have to unfortunately accept that like, yeah, watermelon's a winter fruit, so we're gonna have to unfortunately not have our watermelons during the summer. Yeah, exactly, when we want them.
That's the global aspect too, right?
Yes.
Because then to satisfy that, then it's brought in.
Right, exactly.
From a different country where we have different seasons.
Right, exactly. And that's the other thing too, there's like so many fruits that actually cannot be grown in the US, right? That like we have imported in so many ways. And I wonder to what extent it actually does look like for us to organize groups of people. I literally don't know. I'm curious what you guys think, but like what does it look like to organize all of us to say, okay, we're actually gonna have to only kind of move towards like a seasonality, geographical sort of availability model rather than us getting pineapples. They just don't grow here, or they just don't grow here.
Well, over 70% of the produce in a supermarket is imported in the United States. In a different sort of way, when we talk about globalization, this is what they're struggling with in India right now. In India, there is this movement to try to stop what's called cold storage, where you actually create a supply chain where you can actually import food. The growing middle class in India, they want to have they travel to America or to Europe, and they want to have fresh fruit all year round. But the political influence of the agricultural class in India, which is very complicated, it's not just farmers, there's a lot of middle people as well, want to stop that. And so there's this huge battle going on, and you'll notice in India every year there's big demonstrations on farms. And a lot of it has to do with this cold storage issue. And so these mega supermarkets, it used to be that farmers have never had the power. It used to be the manufacturers, but now the supermarkets wield great power. And in many ways they control that supply line and that availability of produce. So it's but what I think the basic question for me is, especially when we get back to race, equality, and inclusion, is what is the relationship between government and people? Isn't that the basic question?
Yeah.
And how do we get there? What's the right pathway? And can we have a creed, Or is it just a case by case, especially when dealing with so many different layers of law and legal systems? I'm not sure. What do you think?
And let me throw out a recommendation and then go to you, Allegra. On cold storage,
Yeah.
a book that came out last year, I don't know if you've seen it, Frostbite.
Yeah.
Oh no. They did a podcast.
We did a
Oh, yeah.
podcast, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So interesting to
Yeah.
think about food from that.
Yeah.
Allegra, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought I would add on to Professor Roberts' question, different question, but just looking at the time and wanting to hear from you all and you too. And maybe first just, I was thinking like with seatbelts, like some things that we want to just say like seatbelts, everyone accepts, like weren't accepted when they were introduced and like took decades and still people don't wear seatbelts. So like also like no smoking, like there are so many things that are like really amazing public health interventions that had huge resistance at first, like for decades. So something I've been thinking about with this conversation I have a public health background in history, so not law. But a lot of these issues, CAFOs, this phishing stuff, I've looked at I've learned about, looked at, whatever, in more of a public health context. So my question is, and this is like a genuine, I'm a scholar in training, public health practitioner, like not trying to do a devil's advocate thing, but how do you see the benefit of advocating for like food law and critical race studies when so many of these things are also immigration, labor, public health? Like, why not advocate for like systems, or how can you do that while you want to focus on two specific angles? Do you get my question? Like, I'm sitting now in a history perspective thinking about a lot of this, but like basically how to draw connections across a lot of things, and how do we weigh really advocating for like these specific areas of study or discipline working together, like these two, versus also including something like, I'm not trying to be like public health has to be in everything, but like other areas of work. So I just thought with your question about like government and relationships, also there's this of like, if we're gonna turn practically to like, how do we make change? How do we actually think about what disciplines and like perspectives and approaches are part of that?
I think CRT is so interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
I don't think it's mutually exclusive in any way, right? It's almost like it's such an umbrella that it opens the door to all of those fields, right? And yes, when I'm writing, it's if you look at the footnote, it's like history, health, public health,
Just from what you mentioned, yeah.
Like it's everything you just mentioned. And I don't think that putting a CRT label on it is narrowing or restricting. I think it's broadening and inviting, right?
And I think the same is true with food systems. It's a systems approach, and that's also just the beauty of intersectionality. It's like everything is related, everything is connected. People in different groups with different identities and overlapping identities, everything kind of ties together. And yeah, I look at CRT as a toolkit that expands our options and enables us to put together food systems that have traditionally been pretty white dominated and controlled by, those with power, the select few, and expand them. And yeah, I just want to see,
And Lucy, your focus on storytelling is also that broadening to bring more voices and perspectives in, right?
Yeah, and it's actually funny. I agree with everything, but I will also make sort of a counterpoint a little bit, which is just, I think when I took critical race theory in law school and learned about things like intersectionality, to me it was so surprising the historical context, because I think now we hear about CRT all the time. It's taught in elementary schools, it's taught and that's not true. And like actually learning the canon of CRT, it is so specifically based in the law and based in like intersectionality is based in the class actions that like would only certify Black people or women, like Black men or women, not Black women. So like, and I think it's really interesting how the terminology like intersectionality has been exported and it does apply to so many things. But I think in terms of critical race theory, I think because it has such a root, I think it comes from history and it comes from Black feminism and all these things, but it also is so focused in the law and focused in the US history and US law. So I think it is really useful to figure out laws in the US and globally, but I think it definitely just by its nature brings in history and brings in public health. I mean, so much of what we talk about is the fact that race is a social construction, but how can it also be used to change policy and to change law, looking at racial outcomes that are different in health and in all these things. So I think also because we're in a law school and we're all thinking about the law most of the time, I think that feels like a solution, hopefully, which is let's change the law. And I think we need the government, to do that. But yeah, I think they are really connected, and I do think food systems as a approach goes along with that nicely.
If I can build, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that all of that is right, Lucy, but I also think that it's still an issue when we consider these issues of thinking that everything is about the law. And so, I think going to your point is that the law is just one part of it, right? And so the law will help in some aspects, but then the law is not actually helpful in other aspects, right? We're at a law school, and so we tend to think about the law and what can the law do and what can the law do. But I think it's a really good point to say that it can't just be law. It has to be political education. It has to be other kind of grassroots organization. It has to be, we need to be talking to the public health folks and working all together because the problem is so multifaceted.
I agree, and to build on Ollie's excellent comments, I think that as lawyers, we're often focused on problem solving. And so for that reason, the law becomes the most obvious tool for us. But I agree that in terms of understanding the problem, we need to do a lot more borrowing of methodologies in different fields. And
Maybe sharing.
sharing, absolutely. And that's why we try to focus on interdisciplinary approaches. But oftentimes we're missing causal information or information that will help us understand the nature of a problem. And all of that we can really benefit from different methodologies in different fields, sociological, history, you name it. I mean, that's why TWEL is such an important tool, actually. When we think about structural issues. So and that's what we do with our students, really, right? We try to figure out different ways of looking at the problem, but it's really an important question. And the only way to solve it is to come together in so many different ways.
I'm gonna skip this slide because we talked a bit about the criminalization of labor and migration. Do you want to touch briefly on the Alien Tort Statute, which is a good example of the limitations of the law? It used to be used a lot. It had a short lifespan of being used a lot, actually. But for 20, 30 years, it was pretty useful for holding corporations accountable, American corporations committing atrocities and labor abuse abroad, sometimes in food production. But lately, for the past couple decades, the Supreme Court has been ruling that it's not sufficiently connected to U.S. contacts. So, that's all on that note. But I think it might be nice for us to kind of talk about maybe in the last few minutes our visions for the initiative and final notes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the camera to all of those students who are watching this. Please join this initiative. I think it's really important, and I think that there's just so much we can do with it. And we had the privilege of starting it. Professor Roberts is still here. Professor Freeman is at Southwestern doing amazing work and having cool student papers. So I think also doing more school connection and work across schools and across people who are doing this kind of thinking is the future of it.
So maybe Professor Freeman can make a pledge that she's going to work with UCLA and work with Professor
Yes,
Freeman.
I mean, UCLA can pledge to me, we're gonna hire you to do this work, fly you out of your Southwest, I will join you all anytime. Yeah, I think it would be interesting to think about, we have this whole food law network. And I don't know, maybe we can have a sort of sub-network or something to connect students across the country who are particularly focused. I think that would be possible.
Well, some of the tools that we've been building, you may want to just discuss these briefly.
Oh.
It's the library, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't include it up here, but I have about 20 pages of food-related media resources that intersect with race and human rights. Podcasts, films, books, movies, everything. I'm still kind of trying to figure out what to do with that, like where to put it so that it's accessible. I don't know if we're gonna put it on the UCLA Law Library.
Yeah.
But I want those to be super available to everyone.
And where people can contribute and build it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. I think we need two things from my perspective, if you don't mind. One, we need people who want to commit scholarship. We need more scholarship. And secondly, we need organizers, managers, facilitators, because we're still trying to build the library, but how to facilitate unique relationships with Southwestern Law School and UCLA on this initiative. So we need both types.
And
it's-
advocacy and activism.
Advocacy, yes, definitely. So if students are interested, they should just email me,
Yeah,
call me, or Professor Winters, Professor Freeman, and
Any of us.
we can help figure out. There's enough room for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
definitely.
there's so much to be done. There's like the constitutional right to food. There's
Yes. We can talk about
regulations
that.
and solutions to fishing. There's
Whatever
local
you can think
level-
of.
There's also local, okay, something that I feel like we would be remiss without mentioning, and I think we've kind of flirted with it a lot this panel, but I just think thinking about our current climate crisis and food and how that, of course, I think has been really well documented, is so connected to race and injustice, but just thinking about what are we going to do in the future, and I think I've always believed in the importance of growing everyone who wants to, having the ability to grow food locally, but it's really hard. My lemon tree is dying and it's really hard to save it, for example. But like, it's just an interesting thing, and as temperatures keep climbing and things keep getting worse, just like we're gonna need to have more resilient food systems, which I just think we need to be also thinking about in terms of all of this and how it's just getting harder and harder to grow food.
get out to your urban farms.
Yeah.
Right. Also, I think it's really important to keep a sort of listening aspect to this, because if I ask anyone, well, what do you think is an example of food oppression that you observe or people are experiencing? It's like a different answer for as many people as you ask. And so we're in our own spaces and we can only identify our own things that are close with us or that we think about, but to keep a space of tracking what are issues in different people's lives or, their own geographic communities or whatever it is that need attention, that maybe we can.
Well, that speaks to the inclusion part of this initiative in a really important way. For example, I was surprised some years ago when we discovered that LGBT community was way underrepresented on SNAP benefits. And we ended up writing a letter to the Secretary of Agriculture with help here at UCLA, and we got the attention. And they circulated that letter throughout the USDA. But those are things that I would have never expected. So you're right, we have to listen, we have to pay attention, and there's all kinds of things moving together at different paces in different ways.
Yeah, there's a new book also, maybe you can do a podcast, What is Queer Food? That just came out this year.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the book. Yeah, we should do that.
I'll close with two final quotes. One is freedom is a place we must build. And I think that's super true from food systems. That's Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And a quote from Octavia Butler, all that you touch you change, all that you touch you change, all that you change touches you. I think that's the quote. But I really want to implore students to take this panel and feel empowered and know that you could do this, you could join us and work on this CRT food initiative, but you could also do this for any subject. And it's just so important that we keep these conversations alive.
You guys are wonderful.
I would love to, has anyone heard of the Feral Atlas? Lucy's heard me say this a bunch of times. I just came across this in my own work. It's Feral, Feral, and it's if you look at it on a laptop, it's best. It was set up by Anna Tsing, who's a anthropologist at UC Santa Cruz, and it basically takes a lot of issues like empire and industry and different kind of topics, and then has all these other like food and animals, and it's thinking about like Anthropocene, human impact on environment, ecologies, animals. There's a lot of food involved in it too. And it's a really cool thing to just play with. You can kind of click around and then it brings in all these different sources and articles. And it's just an interesting way to think about how a lot of this is so connected.
Thank you.
I'll send it to you, sure.
Thanks everyone for being part of this
Thank
conversation.
you all for coming.
Yeah, it's really
so
great.
good.